Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you, Christian, for inviting me to speak with your Sangha. It's really an honor. I was thinking how out of date that that bio is, and doesn't really say anything about my background in Buddhism. So just briefly, I started meditating quite young. I was like, so many people that find this path was suffering quite a bit at home, and a 10th grade teacher handed me this square blue book called Be Here Now by Ram Dass. Anyone have that book? And I started using it and finding a mantra on the school bus. This was my first attempt at meditation. And then from there I went on to explore things. My first retreat was with Thich Nhat Hanh. I did several with him, and then moved out of Los Angeles into the mountains here in Southern California, and found that there was a Zen monastery not that far from where I lived. And I started attending their Sunday program, and then I started sitting 7-day sesshin or retreats, and then before you knew it, I was all in and spending long retreats there. And it's actually where I met my wonderful partner, who was living there residentially. And then I also have had a lot of practice and study and teaching in the Vipassana tradition. My teacher, I would bet a lot of you know him or know of him, Larry Yang. Anybody recognize that name? Just wave your hand. Yeah, a few of you. So Larry had developed so many programs at Spirit Rock, because as a queer man of color, he did not see people who looked like him in the rooms. So he started holding LGBTQI and people of color sitting groups, and then eventually retreats, and then eventually teacher training. So he and his husband moved to Palm Springs, and we together started an Insight Community of the Desert. And it's interesting, our Sunday schedule is exactly the same as your Sunday schedule. So, and I've been given teacher transmission by both my Zen teacher and by Larry. So, yeah. But that being said, MBSR, or secular mindfulness, has been a big part of my life. Not so much right now, but it was a pleasure, and I learned a lot. And some of you may or may not have opinions or have heard of MBSR. And some of the feedback we sometimes get is, that it's lacking the Buddhist foundations, and then the other side, I hear MBSR teachers saying, I don't know enough about Buddhism, which is usually true to some degree, because John Kabat-Zinn developed that program from his own Zen practice and his Hatha Yoga practice, and it's very much founded in the fundamental Buddhist teachings. So I was inspired to write a book about that. It's called The Dharma of Modern Mindfulness, and that came out in 2018. And it was helpful for me just to connect a lot of the dots, and then write about them. So that is way more than enough about me. I was really interested when Christian approached me. Hi, Christian. Thank you. It's good to see you. when Christian approached me, we were just briefly went back and forth about topics, and he said, I think equanimity can always be helpful, which is so true. You can't really go wrong with that, and it's a topic that I think is really worth teaching and more importantly practicing and nourishing. There, as in so many of the Buddhist teachings, they give us ways to nourish the very quality that we're talking about. It is very difficult times, and it's very understandable and not easy to stay centered and equanimous right now, depending on how much you're exposing yourself to world and particularly United States events and politics. So for me anyway, it's a topic that is alive and well and very much in my own practice, because it is so turbulent. I'm just going to take a breath here. I was looking at your homepage, and I was so knocked out by what you have on there about your practice. And I'm going to read it to you because I want you to listen to it with fresh ears. And I also want you to listen to it as a teaching on equanimity. To me, it truly is a teaching on equanimity. As a Buddhist organization, GBF undertakes the study and practice of living with mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. Those are some of the threads that inform equanimity. Toward all beings, including those with whom we don't agree, we do not experience this as being weak or passive. On the contrary, Buddhism is a path of courage, discipline, and deep commitment to truth and right action. Living with mindful awareness requires we first examine our own hearts and minds to become aware of unconscious internal biases and assumptions in order to avoid the very dynamics of division and objectification which we strive to end. That is such a beautiful description of how to integrate equanimity into our lives. I'm going to skip a little bit of it. It is a path based on the disciplined application of moral principles of non-harm, development of community, and liberation for all beings, not just those who are privileged. So I was really struck by what a beautiful message that you have, and how much it spoke to me as I'd been working on the talk, and I went back and looked at that, and I'm like, that's it. That's the whole talk. So let's just look at where equanimity falls within the Buddhist teachings. It shows up on several lists. I'm going to be speaking mostly from the perspective of the Brahma Viharas, the 4 heart qualities, and how we cultivate them: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. But it's also found in the characteristics of the 4th jhanas, the 7th of the factors of enlightenment, and the 10th of the paramis. So equanimity can sound at first like it's kind of flat. Anyone have that reaction to that word? It sounds like it might even be a little boring. It's sort of a no drama zone. But it's such an important part of our path, and a quality that we cultivate through our very meditation practice. So simply something small, like not scratching an itch in your sit, or not reaching for your water bottle, or refraining from anything that comes up as a craving while you're sitting is a very strong practice that cultivates equanimity. I can refrain from taking this impulsive action just for this moment, and then we build from there. So right built into our practice, we're cultivating equanimity. It also is seen as a quality of mind and heart. So that's why I want to focus a little bit more on the heart practice. So if you look at the word equanimity from the sort of English, Latin origins, it has this implication that it means observing, like kind of stepping back and having an observational role. The word in Latin, the word equus and animus first means soul and being. So the English word equanimity can be understood as even soul or even being. So I love that idea of having an even soul. However, upekkha, which is the Pali word for equanimity, it means to look over as a spectator. It gives us a sense of equanimity as a quality of observation without getting too involved. So that doesn't feel like equanimity to me. That feels like kind of walling oneself off and stepping back. I think the really meaningful and sustainable translation of equanimity is found. I'm gonna try to say this word. It's the Sanskrit word tatra mahata, which means to stand right in the middle. This word gives a sense of that kind of equanimity that we may bring to mind, and invites us to move close to the experience, not to distance and observe. But can we have the type of equanimity that can step right into the middle of things and maintain some sense of groundedness, of peace, of equanimity? And that to me seems more real, more helpful. Not that I want to be dualistic about this, it's just how it hit me. So one interesting way of looking at cultivating the four Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, is the Buddha taught that they have what are called near and far enemies. And I've always found that's a really kind of juicy place to explore them, because it's like it's not this, so it helps us see what it is. So, for example, the near enemy of loving kindness, or metta, is this very attached, singular kind of love and conditional kind of love. You know, any country western song that you listen to, no offense to anyone, would describe something that's not metta. And with compassion, we can feel this hardwired in us empathic resonance with other beings. And if we bring metta to that, the goodwill towards all under any and all circumstances, if we bring that to suffering specifically, then compassion is born out of loving kindness meeting suffering. However, if we get overwhelmed by the suffering and we're exposed to it without wisdom, we'll eventually get burned out or overwhelmed and not able to be of service. So they've actually done some interesting brain studies on the difference between empathy and compassion, because some of the Buddhist monks, Mathieu Ricard, who's also a neuroscientist and a longtime Buddhist monk, said he doesn't believe there is such a thing as compassion fatigue. It's empathy fatigue or outcome fatigue. Attachment to outcome is what really tires us out. So when you invite people to practice showing them some very disturbing pictures, ask them to just feel with it, feel what they feel, a particular part of the brain lights up, the amygdala. Then when you ask them to look at these images and wish all those people well, wish that they be held in compassion, that they be free from suffering, a completely different part of the brain lights up that's associated with much more positive affects. So you can't really have compassion fatigue because you're continually wishing yourself and others well as you face the suffering. So I think that might be a good example to show how empathy without wisdom, without the goodwill that metta offers, takes you off balance. But compassion, the practice of bringing kindness to suffering, bringing goodwill, bringing care, can actually show in the brain that this is a positive emotion even in the face of suffering. So that to me is what I would aspire to for equanimity. So the near enemy of equanimity happened to me a number of times. Before my teaching mindfulness, I was a physician assistant for about 25 years, and I was really young when I started, and I was quite a wounded healer. I'd had my own abuse and neglect, which was one of the harder ones to do, taking care of other people. I did find myself getting burned out, and what I practiced, because I did not know these teachings and how they can nourish us, was indifference and apathy. I just simply shut down. So that's the near enemy of equanimity. If we can't find a way to cultivate it, chances are, in the face of so much suffering, we may shut down. And it's interesting just to see the neuroscience that demonstrates the difference. The far enemy of equanimity is greed or attachment. So that'll throw you off balance, right? If we're ruled by greed or overly attached to something. And the same goes for attachment's cousin, aversion. If there's a strong aversion towards what is arising in reality, it's a perfectly natural feeling, especially now. How can we give that some buoyancy, some resilience with the other Brahma Viharas, with some equanimity? One of my favorite definitions I heard when I sat my first 10-day metta retreat at Spirit Rock that was taught by Larry Yang and Sylvia Borstein, and this young guy I'd never heard of named Temple Smith. I bet you some of you know him or of him. He blew me away. He's an incredible teacher if you ever get to sit with him. And he described equanimity as a long, loving look at the real. So taking the long view lovingly at what's true, but having an understanding that things are changing all the time. That fundamental mark of existence, impermanence. If we can keep in mind that things are always changing, they're not solid. I can almost feel that in my body, that fluidity that to me feels like equanimity, if I can remember that. I once got a grant. I worked with a lot of different grants, which was wonderful because I got to teach a lot of people that might not go down this path without some support. So I was given a grant to teach mindfulness, sort of loosely built on the MBSR curriculum, to a group of women living in a women's homeless, it was more than a shelter, like a rehab place, residence. And I was young, I was cocky, I thought, I can do that. But there were so many things I didn't take into account, like, many of them were just recently clean and sober, barely. Many of them had mental health issues. Many of them were much more worried about seeing their kids and when they'd get them back, and they were tired. It was an evening class. They were exhausted. I think they'd been exhausted for a very, very long time because living on the streets is so hard. So there was zero interest in this class, to put it mildly. But they weren't like completely rebellious, because one of their guard keepers, or what, I don't know what to call her, was in the room. And one of them let me know one day before class that that's why no one was participating. So it's just not an ideal setup. And during that class, I had the opportunity to sit a short retreat with Sharon Salzberg, and it was on the 4 Brahma Viharas. And very uncharacteristically, because I'm shy, I grabbed the mic during the Q&A and said, blah, 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 I'm working with this group, I don't know what to do. I'm sure she's like, hey, take a breath. But she was very kind, and she just said these simple words to me. She said, expand your timeline. You don't know what seeds you're planting now. So those words have stayed with me. That was many years ago, stayed with me really front and center with everything, because we don't really know what is coming, as we're feeling this every day so vividly, more so, even though it's always been true. But right now there are very big things that are changing and happening every day. So we could really use a dose of being able to stand on our own 2 feet and honor ourselves and each other in this way. So expanding your timeline, especially, those of you who've raised teenagers or have young adult children who maybe aren't on your path of choice, what you would have chosen for them, or your elderly parents who don't follow any of the instructions they're supposed to follow. And this can, of course, or our partner, we continue to say, could you please, put the dishes on the left side of the sink, the dirty ones. And okay, so this is what's going on in my house. So, we have this desire for things to go our way, and that is not an equanimous position. So what you also have on your website that I love, it comes from this beautiful Chinese koan by the third Zen ancestor, the Jin Jiming. It says, the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. So just feel into that and explore that if it resonates with you at all, and watch if that is actually operating in your life or not. So with these people in our lives that aren't doing what we want them to do is a great place to use the Brahma Viharas, all of them together, to lead us to a state of equanimity. I'm just going to pause for a moment. So far, is anything coming up for you that you're aware of, that you're thinking about, and that includes our Zoom family and our in-person family?
Yes, we have a question here.
Okay, thank you very much. You spoke about not having attachments. We had a teacher once who refined that about not being attached to our preferences is the stumbling block.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right about that quote. Yes, thank you for that. And it's true. It's not that we are trying to banish attachments. It's impossible, first of all, and it's not kind. But we can bring awareness to them and then put some space around them so we can see if there's room to loosen the grip a little bit. But yes, thank you for that point. So I will just carry on for a little bit. One of the things I learned during my multiple times of being burned out, apathetic, indifferent, was when you are taking care of yourself, you're doing the metta for oneself, compassion for oneself, and joy, it's a lot more easy to come out of that shell of apathy and actually be present for the person, because you have this resiliency blanket around you. It's not a wall, but it's a way to have some protection, some balance, and at the same time be present for the person. It's an interesting balance, and it's really, I would say, at the heart of equanimity. But as I said, let's say we're struggling with someone in our lives. They're not doing what we want, and the dishes are still on the wrong side of the sink. We can begin by working with metta, since it's the first of the four. And for example, there's a story that Sharon shares about one of her students who was really struggling with a feeling of low self-worth, and on top of that, envy for a friend of hers. The student herself was single. She had a job that was kind of just a job, but not a passion. She had, enough money to get by, and that's about it. And she had some health problems. So she didn't really feel so great about her life, but she had a close friend, the one she called in her mind, she who has it all. She was married, she was a successful entrepreneur, she had a lovely home, and she did a lot of comparing, which is certainly a painful practice for all of us. And so as she started working with the Brahma Viharas, she started with loving kindness for herself, and then for her friends, and then, as we do with different groups of people, with difficult people. I actually think this friend landed in the difficult person category. Even though she did really love her, she was bothered. So she practiced that. And as that went on and they checked in, she began to see things about this woman that she didn't see before, just looking on the surface. Like, for example, her father was an alcoholic, and her brother had early onset Alzheimer's, and her business was always a little precarious. You know, her life wasn't perfect. It came with its own complexities, its own suffering. And that is when some compassion for this woman arose. And from there, she began to also have compassion for herself and to see the good things in her own life, that she was only comparing on the superficial level. But she had some other things like a happy, healthy family life, peace. Well, she didn't have a lot of money. She didn't really have to stress about it. So she began to see the good in her own life, as well as the pain in her friend's life, which led to eventually being able to develop some mudita, to actually experience some joy for this other person. And as you know, mudita is the antidote to envy, because, you know, we live, some of us, in some like dominant white mainstream culture, looks at joy, happiness, money certainly, as these scarce quantities. There's only enough to go around. So like, hey, if you're doing really well, there might not be enough left over for me. You guys know what I'm talking about? It's sort of like that Instagram feeling. You know, everyone's life's going just zippity-doo-dah, and they just cross the triathlon, and their organic garden is providing lunch, and, you know, anyway, what we do. I'm not in any way dismissing those wonderful people sharing their joy. Did I miss something?
We were just laughing. Yeah.
Oh, at me. Okay, at me. Good. I like that. So she was able to develop even joy for her, and that journey that took her from bringing herself some loving kindness, acknowledging what she did have, having compassion for the hard things in her life and her friend's life, and then even being able to be happy for her. And that left her in a state of equanimity. So these things really feed one another if we are practicing them as a whole. And I learned from, if you're interested in this, I learned some phrases for all of them that are really helpful in cultivating this. Does that make sense to you? Are you resonating with any of that?
There are nods. Yes. In case there are nods saying yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so a few people. Thanks. There's a couple of old stories, analogies that people use to describe equanimity, and you've probably heard them, but maybe you haven't. Anyway, you haven't heard them today, at this moment, this time and place. One is the likening of putting a tablespoon of salt in a quart of water, which would be fairly salty. And then putting a tablespoon of salt in the fresh spring that the water came from probably wouldn't be noticeable, except maybe by one fish. So the idea that we have a bigger container is really helpful as part of our practice. I'll go back to not scratching that itch. Every time that we refrain from going to a craving, let's just say particularly during a sit, we're building our capacity. Our container is getting bigger to be able to hold and be in the midst of things just as they are, as much as we want to change them. And that doesn't mean inaction. It just means it's a nourished, solid, healthy place from which to take that wise action, to actually have some clarity about what it is that you feel you can do at this particular time. Is there someone you can write to? Is there anything that you can do in your life that will contribute to the betterment of the world? And these can be small things, because if all of us do it, they're not so small. They really aren't. One of the things, I asked a good friend of mine, she's a retired cardiologist. She's a longtime student of Pema Chodron. She's a very interesting woman with a lot of knowledge. And I asked how she was handling what's going on in the world, and she said, "Just I don't pay any attention. I'm just not looking at it at all." And I found myself like accidentally saying, "Are you sure that's the best idea?" Which is so none of my business. That is not an example of equanimity. That's an example of meddling in someone else's life. But I was a little bit surprised, because I think this is a place where all of us are practicing our own form of equanimity. Is how much do we let in? How much can we handle before we go into overwhelm and despair and hopelessness, from which we can't really take any wise action? So it becomes a practice, kind of titrating how much you can take. And for me, one of the ways I'm able to tune into that is through the body. My body will tell me when, like, there's too much salt in a small container, right? Anyone else have a sense in your body when you've had enough of it? Do you find your body as a barometer to help inform you with decisions like that?
Yes.
Okay. So
I
that's
can't
what.
sleep. I can't sleep if I listen to too much news.
Yeah. Of course. Of course. It's very activating and it's very scary, and that is not a good place to develop enough relaxation to go to sleep. And so this would be an example of making wise choices to support our equanimity and certainly our well-being, because we need to sleep. It's good for us. So at what point, can we use the body as a barometer to say, I think that's enough for today, for right now. And there was one thing that, Heather Cox Richardson said, or somebody like that I'm going to come back to, because right now I'm shutting down. But I think to keep enough information coming in to keep our hearts alive, to make sure we don't numb out, so we can be present for what we're needed for, when we're needed, and how we might be needed will come from a place of equanimity and balance. And as I've been asking myself that question a lot, as I'm sure you guys have too, I just noticed something in my day-to-day life while the world feels kind of ugly and incredibly unfair. And I won't even go on about it right now. The man that I've lived with for the last 20 years is here on a green card, and it's kind of a scary time for us. Um, is I've been noticing that when people are good in the world, when people are kind, and I keep seeing it, I keep finding it. Someone, at the checkout who's going out of their way to find me a coupon, or someone who went out of her way to help me find what I was looking for in such a friendly way. And when she found it, it wasn't phony at all. She was like, "Yay!" And I said, "You seem like you really care about your customers." She said, "I do." Like no one had ever noticed it before. So these are just little things in my day to try to nourish and cultivate kindness, friendliness, um, and to really acknowledge people who do go out of their way to offer them loving kindness in that way, to say you matter, you're appreciated. And it's a day-to-day practice, and actually it just came to me by paying attention that I was being taken care of really, really well. Um, and I think it helps balance out the cruelty that we're seeing. I mean, certainly, not on the large scale, but at least in my heart, for that moment, it gives me a feeling of reassurance that there is good in the world and there are good people in the world. Um, is this a place where you stop for Q&A or take a
Yeah,
break?
sure. Yep. We have a hand up here, so yep, speak up for the microphone.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much for a really engaging talk.
Thank you.
It doesn't come across on Zoom to you, unfortunately, but it's really resonating a lot with those of us in the room. So thank you. Yeah, you're planting seeds you don't know. You don't come through on Zoom. One of the things you said about like bringing yourself up out of despair or numbness or burnout and things like that was this sense of compassion, like self-compassion, and then of course that turns into compassion for others. And it reminds me of this one friend of mine is such a great example when he observes something that's really happening to someone or to himself is how I turn it. I hear him say, "Oh, pumpkin," just like there's this, "Oh, sweetie," and it's and that's what I hear in my head, like, "Oh, sweetie,"
Oh,
and it just really opens my heart, to have true compassion. And when I can hear that in my head, it just changes everything.
absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. When that voice becomes your own voice, that is a very important point. And also takes a lot of pressure off other people. But no, it's a very key moment that it's become your own voice. That's beautiful.
Anyone online would like to unmute? Go ahead,
Steve?
Steve.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your talk today. I've been typing a lot of juicy notes that were really helpful for me. And I see in my notes that I lost the train of thought when you first introduced kind of earlier on in the talk about the four enemies of equanimity, craving and aversion. And then I have a note, take a long loving look at, and then don't remember what you were saying, if you recall, to finish
What are we
that
long, loving
point.
looking at? Um, The rest of that
Yeah,
sentence is the real. We're taking a long, loving
the
look at
real,
reality.
that reality. Okay. So that way, can you talk to me more about that? What that means in relation to the far enemies of,
Well, tell me what it means to you. What do you think it means to take
well,
a longer view, for
so I
things to
guess I just,
play out?
stepping back and, not reacting, not having an opinion, um, just allowing yourself to be calm and to realize that, perhaps I don't know what's going to happen down the road, and
Yes,
I just have to be
yes.
open to whatever comes up.
You did a great job of answering your question.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Others in the room or online?
Oh, it resonated with me when you were sharing your personal experience of working as a physician assistant and feeling burnout, because I've been general practitioner physician for 33 years now, and last few years I was feeling burnout, and I feel less compassion for the patients. It made me think, like, what is compassion? Like, I feel more judgmental of patients. Like, I judge them for the stupid things they do, that they don't listen to what I tell them. And, or they have some weird ideas that have nothing to do with reality. And I was trying to find these practical things, besides cutting down on hours that I'm working, which is important. And I will be retiring next year, which is important. But I don't want to retire a bitter, disappointed, numb physician because I enjoyed being a doctor for many years. Like, what are those practical tricks that helped you to get out of your burnout?
You're muted. Beth, you're muted.
Sorry, guys. First of all, I'd be really happy to talk with you offline sometime. Christian can get you my information. But I would start with having compassion for how burned out I am. Just to not even go towards the other person, but start with just acknowledging this is where I am right now and really accepting that this is where I am. And once you own that, then you can bring loving kindness and compassion for yourself, and then which will nourish you enough to help your interaction with the other person. But that's how I've always had to start, with just noticing, wow, I am not who I want to be right now. I'm feeling very cold or unfriendly, and how can I just go, wow, may I be kind to myself right now. May I be held in great compassion. And then may we be both held in great compassion. And then the words and the right next thing to do seems to start happening. But as I said, it's a longer conversation that I've worked on a lot. And bless you for all the work you've done.
Thank you. I'll reach out to you.
Okay.
Christian, go ahead.
Thank you again for accepting our invitation to come and share your wisdom with us. And yeah, equanimity for me has always been a challenge when I'm discussing it with people who are not acquainted with Buddhism at all. And I have friends who ask me or claim that equanimity is complacency. And I'm so glad today that you spent some time dispelling that. And yeah, really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I'm so glad it was helpful. Thank you,
Yep.
Christian.